Hi, my name is Micah McLean, and I'm the creator of Micah McLean Talks. Today you're watching my interview with Bernice King, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, comment, and share this interview with your friends, your colleagues, and your family members. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the interview.
Dr. King, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Coming from a family with, such famous parents, your dad, Martin Luther King Jr., your mom, Coretta Scott King, it's very big shoes to fill as far as an activist.
No kidding. Wow, yes. Very big, humongous. Yeah. I can't even walk in them.
Yeah.
It's been the lifeblood of my family. And I've kind of given my life to that. I can't even imagine not being connected to what's happening at this moment. I don't know how anybody can imagine not being connected in some way in this moment.
Well, what do you think your parents would think of this moment?
I have to first say my mom would be exhilarated because she was always committed and dedicated to the next generation. That's one of the reasons she founded the King Center, where I serve as the CEO, which is the official living memorial to the life, work, and legacy of my father. And, she would be so excited and really encouraging them to continue nonviolent peaceful protest because it helps to keep things focused on the true narrative. Unfortunately, there have been those left and right extreme who have, infiltrated and tried to change the narrative. But thank God, these nonviolent peaceful protesters, these young people are saying, no, this is what it's about, keeping it on justice.
I follow you on social media and you're doing a great job with all of that. And one thing I found interesting is you were saying you love that everyone's quoting your father, but it's also interesting because he was hated, obviously in 1968. Not like he's the most popular guy. At one point, you think you said he was one of the most hated men in the country?
Yeah, I say all the time, I've been saying this probably 2 years when I go around speaking in this country and around the world. I say, in 68, my father was one of the most hated men in America. And now he's one of the most loved men in the world. So much so that, people do take liberties to kind of take different quotes to fit their situation. And nothing is more frustrating for me than that. I'd say to people, if you're gonna use his words, try to find the context of those words that he used them in. For instance, when he talked about riots being the language of the unheard, he was not justifying and saying that he endorsed riots. He was explaining where the riots are coming from. The other one that gets taken out of context all the time is, I have a dream that my 4 children would one day live in a nation where they would not be judged by the color of the skin, but by the content of their character. And people are always saying Dr. King was for a colorblind America, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, he was basically explaining that, no, there's a beauty in who I am as a Black person, but I should not be judged by those standards. And so it's not that you don't see my race, you see my race, you acknowledge my race, and you accept everything I bring along with that. The beauty of the movement now, finally, for Black lives is the collection of who we are as America.
Good afternoon, Bernice King. Thank you so much for coming on to the platform. You are the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. You are an activist, you're a minister, you're a solutionist, you're also a peace advocate, and you are the CEO of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, please tell us about your early life and your experiences of your father growing up.
was 5 years old when obviously my father was assassinated. So I didn't have an opportunity to really know him as well as my siblings did. By the time I was born, things had escalated in the movement that he was leading, to have a more national focus. Originally, it was confined to the southern parts of the United States of America, dealing with issues of legalized segregation. But by the time 63 came, when I was born, we had the iconic I Have a Dream speech that he delivered. We had already had, the incident with water hoses and billy clubs and dogs being sicked on young people. And so the nation was gripped by those images. And by the time we got to I Have a Dream speech, and then a few more things, we had the bombing at the church there in Birmingham as well, where those 4 young ladies lost their life. And then the Civil Rights Act in 64. So my father, had been traveling a lot. Then he got the Nobel Peace Prize in 64. So he started traveling even more. So I had very little time with him, but we used to play a little game called the kissing game when he would come off the road. And it was my game. No other child benefited from it. There were other things he did with all of us, but this was for me especially, where I would run up into his arms and each one of us had a spot on his face. My mother's, of course, was right smack in the middle of the lips. My sister's was off to the side of the lips. My 2 brothers were on either cheek, and then mine was on the forehead. And so he said, okay, we're going to play the kissing game today. And he'd say, where is, my brother Martin at the time was called Marty. Where's Marty's kiss? And I would kiss him on one of the cheeks. Then he would say Dexter, and then my sister Yolanda, who was Yoki. And then, he'd go through everybody's name. And I would kiss him, and he called each spot a sugar spot. So that was really my bonding experience with him. And then one other time, I just remember being at the dinner table with my family, and right before we would say the blessing over the food, or he would say the blessing. In fact, he would take these little long stem onions. They were green and then white, and they had a little bulb on the end, and he would chew on it like it was a celery stick. I just remember that distinctly. But other than that, I have very little memories. Everything else was told to me about my father. Those were my experiences with him in particular. And of course, after he was assassinated, my mother began to really invoke his teachings as we would gather at the dinner table, the breakfast table, and just throughout our lives as she worked to create and build his legacy through the King Center that I now lead as the CEO, and helping to ensure that there would be a national holiday. And we grew up pretty normal kids. I was oblivious to a lot of the stuff that was happening. I probably would have been the most sheltered of all the kids. I never faced any personal racism. My other siblings did. In fact, my sister, Yolanda, the oldest, who's now deceased, and my brother Martin integrated the first public schools here in the city of Atlanta. So they faced a lot. But I didn't. So, I had a fairly normal life, but everybody in my school, I went to a private school as a young child, and then I went to a public school in high school. But as a child growing up in that private school, it was predominantly white, a lot of Jewish students. They would always say, "You're the daughter of Martin Luther King." And I'd be like, so what? I don't know. I don't really know what that means, we had a pretty normal life, except for we were surrounded by a lot of his teachings. And through time, as I aged and began to better understand, then, I started really recognizing that although we had a normal upbringing, but in the sense of coming from a single head of household, because people forget that. You know, my father was gone at 5. You compare it to kids who lose their father to violence, you know, and now their mother's a single parent raising them. I was raised basically by a single parent. And so all of the challenges that you face growing up in a single head of household, because my mother was extremely busy. You know, for other people, they may have not had the looming call on their life like my mother did. And the work that she did in building the legacy and the continuation of the work of my father. Nonetheless, as other kids, you know, I didn't have her at every, you know, given turn on the road. I didn't get a chance to have my mother, for instance, come to my extracurricular activities. We had other people who kind of supported. My mother had, you know, babysitters, you know, with us, and there was a gentleman who was around a lot who would take care of a lot of the household needs, handyman stuff, cleaning around the house and all that kind of stuff. He would take us to and from school. He would be the one that was there at a lot of my games, and I really appreciated Mr. Hamilton Horton. He was like a, you know, somewhat of a surrogate parent for me. And I thank God for people like that, that we were surrounded that way.
Thank you so much for that really powerful answer and just telling us about the experiences you have with your father. Just drawing up on your experiences more, how did losing your father at the age of 5 impact your upbringing as you grew up?
Well, as I said, it just kind of shifted my mother's place in the home. My mother was a part of the movement in terms of she participated in a lot of strategy sessions. She helped to do freedom concerts to raise money for the movement. Those freedom concerts consisted of her singing and narrating the story of the movement to kind of, you know, to raise awareness about, you know, what the movement was about and what they were trying to accomplish. But she was still home a little bit more. When he was assassinated, that shifted everything. You know, a mother that was there constantly now was gone a lot. So I had to adjust to all of that and really began to understand through time the power of a village in raising us as a family. She raised us because she made sure, number one, that she spent quality time with us. And she always said to people, the most important thing you can do with your children is to spend quality time with them if you can't do the quantity, because it's not just the quantity, it's when you're spending time with them, you're really spending time that's significant and substantive. And she wanted to make sure of that. So she made a deep impression on me that way. But nonetheless, again, you know, I didn't get the benefit of her going to the mall with me, you know, or getting nails done as a girl, you know, and, you know, not having our father in the household and losing him. And then my uncle, who became like a surrogate father, was found in his swimming pool mysteriously. He didn't have water in his lungs. So we're still trying to figure out what happened to him. That was a year after my father. And then when I was 11, my grandmother got shot in church. So, you know, these traumatic events really affected me growing up as a child. It caused me to develop a lot of anger over time. And I've had to manage that anger through my life because it's not all gone. You know, I'm in a better place today because of the seeds that were sown by my mom, the life that she lived before me. You know, she exuded and she talked about forgiveness and unconditional love. And she talked about service to humanity, and she showed us through her actions what it means to serve humanity. So those things, you know, helped along the way eventually for me to come back, you know, to not allowing that anger to overtake me. But yeah, it had a definite impact, and it's still, you know, as I say, there's still residual from not having him here with us.
Thank you so much for just telling us how that event impacted you. And one thing that's really powerful about you is that you are a powerful Christian leader in the US, and you're also an incredible activist, highly sought after. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you were called to ministry at the age of 17. How does your Christian faith impact your approach to activism and your work in fighting for the rights of African Americans?
So, the years ago, there was this campaign that was going around called WWJD. What would Jesus do? And although that campaign is no longer active, I took it to heart, literally, because when I became aware fully of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ, to be saved, as they say, I was serious about following the ways of Christ. I used to say in my 20s, I want to be like Christ. I don't know why I said that, because once I gave him that permission, things come my way. I'm always brought back to what would Jesus do? Remember the lessons and the teachings of Jesus. And so literally in the work that I do on a day-to-day basis, I'm guided by that. I'm guided by the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ, which in many ways are reflected in the work that my father did. As you may know, he extracted the Sermon on the Mount: love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you. He extracted that as inspiration and used the techniques of Gandhi to really develop his nonviolent philosophy, along with some other philosophers and theologians that he studied. And it has become a guidepost in things that I do. And so as I think about it, it's like, is this the heart of Christ? Is this reflected, of the nature and the character of Christ? I can't, for me, Jesus on the cross saying, Father, forgive them, they know what not they do, goes really deep for me. And so I guess the best way to say it is, I can't land in a place that says, I want retribution. I know that there's systems in place in our society where you have to have, people held accountable through our legal processes. But me personally, I can't. Retaliating and retribution is something that, I can't entertain and land there. I have to really see that person through the eyes of God. And that doesn't mean they shouldn't be held accountable in the system. It just means that I personally don't want to see that person destroyed. Because I think people should be given the opportunity to be redeemed. And there's a process in that. Some people will never be. And so that's why you have situations where they have to be, held for the rest of their lives. But I'm not the one to stand in those shoes of judgment. So it really does guide me. Protesting, if I was ever a part of protest, I can't go into a protest with my anger being channeled towards an individual. It's got to be channeled towards what's wrong, the injustice. Because we teach in nonviolence that nonviolence seeks to destroy injustice and not people. And I have to keep that in my mind. That's deeper than just physically. That's my language, my speech, and ultimately how I see that person. My father was very good at articulating how even the adversary, as we call them, or the opponent, or the one who's doing the injustice, is a victim of wrong thinking. In today's time, people are victim of the white supremacist system that we all inherited around the globe. And so, that's how it really guides me on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much for that answer. seen so many images of the work that you've done, such as, you know, praying with Oprah, being vocal on Black Lives Matter, and the inspirational Christian work that you've done doesn't just inspire, you know, people in the US. There's lots of people in the UK that are looking at what you are doing as well, and they're equally as inspired. So following on from that, your father was a phenomenal man. He's a legend in the UK. We read about him every Black History Month, and his "I Have a Dream" speech moved the heart of almost everyone in my class when I was at school. So what made your father such a great speaker?
I think because he was congruent with the message. You know, a lot of people speak things out of their head, not necessarily out of their heart. They're not necessarily aligned with what they're saying, but it may sound good, you know, or, you know, they want to give the impression, you know, that this is something that they truly believe in, but you can really see through all of that. At least I can. For my father, there was an authenticity when he spoke. You believed it. And also, he was an artist. He was artistic in his expressions, very poetic, you know, and was able to paint pictures, you know, as he eloquently spoke. You know, I remember one specific thing where he said, everybody is significant, from a bass black, you know, to a treble white. Well, we all know that's the piano and the keys, you know, and you start envisioning, you know, that piano and how the harmony is made with the black and white. You know, so he was able, you know, to really put that picture right before you, and it just gripped you. So, and obviously his voice was melodic. It was an instrument, and so unique. And so I think that's what captured. So all of those things together, I think, is what captured people's attention.
Thank you so much for that. And following on from that, the Independent newspaper considers Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech to be the greatest oration of all time. Why do you think the speech had the impact that it did globally?
Because it was universal. He talked out of the context of the issues that we were faced in the United States with the Black community in particular, but he used universal themes of justice and equality and togetherness and unity and freedom. And it doesn't matter what nation you're from. Everybody, when we commemorated the 50th anniversary of the "I Have a Dream" speech back in 2013, I can't remember our exact thing, but it was something along the lines of, because the March on Washington originally was for freedom and jobs. And so it was something along the lines of freedom, freedom something, just do it, a freedom. I can't remember. But what I recognized at that time is that there are three freedoms universally that people seek. One is the freedom to prosper in life, the freedom to participate in government, you know, to have your voice heard, to be a part of a democracy, to be able to speak up, you know, and challenge things, you know, freedom of expression. So to participate in government, and the freedom to peacefully coexist. And I think Daddy spoke to all of that in the "I Have a Dream" speech. So it didn't matter that he was a citizen of the United States of America. It didn't matter. He talked about police brutality and Blacks not being able to find a resting place when they would travel along the highways of our nation. They couldn't, you know, find a hotel or motel who would accept them. That may have not been the condition in a particular nation, but the other things that he spoke about, you know, concerning justice, letting justice roll down like water, living up to and righteousness like a mighty stream. And then the nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. I mean, nations have different creeds, you know, that appeals to people. When he talked about, you know, "I have a dream," you know, that Black children and white children will be able to join hands together and sing with the words. When he talked about, you know, the table of brotherhood and sisterhood, who in any other nation, you know, that is truly a lover and an aspirer after freedom wouldn't want that. So I think that's what, he was able to do. He broke forth past the language of just his nation, or our nation over here in the United States of America, or just our community as the Black community. Back then they called us the Negroes, and spoke to the universe. He spoke to humanity. And you're right. All over the world. I mean, people who I encounter from all over the world, they say, your father's speech, which is interesting. You say that independent newspapers say he's the greatest oration of all time. I would have to agree. It is the most famous and known speeches in the world. You cannot name one speech by a singular person that individuals on every continent of this world that we live in know. The only one you can think of is "I Have a Dream."
Yeah, and yeah, it really was so powerful, and it was just beautiful to see in the US, Obama becoming president and Kamala Harris becoming vice president. Over the UK, we even hope for one day that we will see a Black prime minister. We're still getting there. We're not quite like the US yet, but we're getting there. But following on from that question, what are the greatest challenges you've experienced when building upon your father's legacy?
I think there are two big challenges. One is the climate and the culture that we live in. People have an affinity for violence. And when you talk about Dr. King, you're really talking about nonviolence as a way to engage, as a way to speak, as a way to act, as a way to think. And in a culture that dismisses that, it makes it very difficult sometimes to convey to people who can't quite get the power, the transformative power of love and action, which is nonviolence. And so it makes the work difficult and challenging, but nonetheless, when you know the truth and the power of it, you continue to forge forth ahead, and that's what we do. The second thing is the misappropriation of his words. So in many respects, he's still not fully understood because people haven't fully studied him. We've gotten sound bites from here, snippets from stories here, but people haven't really studied Dr. King holistically. And so that's why the work that we do at the King Center is so important as the official living memorial to the life, work, and legacy of my father. We are trying to ensure that people understand holistically what that legacy was about, his teachings. So we do actually, in our nonviolence trainings, in our nonviolence workshops, in our online experiences, we expose people to those teachings and the historical context and relate it to today, and so that's where that challenge is. How do we break forth in a society where we're moving further and further away from the time period where he utilized these things, and people have become more, drawn to violence. And then secondly, as we move further and further away, people truly understanding, the story and the history and the full capacity of the work. But I'm not discouraged. I'm excited that we have an institution. My mother was very forward thinking. And because we have an institution and we have an archive as a part of the King Center, we have the largest primary, the largest collection of primary source materials related to the modern civil rights movement. You will not find a collection as large as ours that directly relates to the movement under my father's leadership, because we have papers of organizations and individuals that were part of the movement at that time. And then, of course, my mother's papers are there, and the rest of them will join there, and it will be even a greater story. So, those are the challenges: the culture that we live in today, and just the whole misunderstanding of his legacy and the misappropriation of his words that people use to fit their causes because they're taking him out of context. That's why it's important to fully study him.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. This nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Ask you is, there's lots of people, there'll be lots of people in the UK that will watch this and they might want to support the work of the King Center. So how can they support the work of the King Center or get you to do workshops over here, maybe like through, yeah.
So people can feel free to visit thekingcenter.org. We have our beloved community talks that we do periodically where we deal with courageous conversations around some of these issues that divide us as a world, as people, as a humanity, whether we're talking about issues of democracy or talking about issues of economic justice or issues of criminal justice or issues of race. We have these tough conversations. So that's usually when we do those. You know, we post them out on all of our Facebook page, so we're on all our social media platforms, so people can, you know, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, to find out as we post out these different beloved community talks. We have, as I said, online workshops and experiences, Nonviolence 365. We have several that are coming up now. One that's going to be really looking at the origin of whiteness and race and white supremacy and how we got to where we are today. And how do we kind of redirect our thinking to create a world that is focused on creating a beloved community that's more inclusive. So the work of the beloved community. So that particular thing session is going to be taking place, I think this coming Monday, November 29th, 30th, and December 1st. And then we have other Be Love trainings, the power of love, how the revolutionary power of love, the transformative power of love. And then we have our Students with King, where schools from all over, even around the world, can participate in finding out more about different people who either work with my father, knew my father, or worked with my mother, knew my mother, and they can interface with that. We have reading corners for kids to learn more about, just the freedom struggle in particular in our nation and how do we create this beloved community. So that's Students with King, Beloved Community Talks, our nonviolence education training. We're soon going to have an online experience that people can do at their own pace. So please look out for that. Please let your audience know to please stay in touch with thekingcenter.org and find out about that, because that's going to let them find out more about Dr. King and the work that he did and how nonviolence impacted, influenced, and helped him to lead social change in the United States of America, and how they can lead nonviolent social change in your country as well. And then we have the King Holiday Observance that's coming up. We have a Beloved Community Summit that will be a part of that on the 13th and 14th of January. We have Beloved Community Awards that will air on the 15th of January, and all this will be virtual. And then we have the King Holiday, the Beloved Community Commemorative Service on the actual King Holiday. Bishop Michael Curry, who many of you all know from the Royals wedding. Well, they may not call them Royals anymore, but Harry and Meghan's wedding, is going to be preaching for our commemorative service in Atlanta on January 17th for the King Holiday. So we have a lot of stuff that we're doing, and the best way to find out is to really visit thekingcenter.org to find out more and to get connected. Eventually, we're going to have a Beloved Community Network that people can join and become a part of our family and the work that we will be doing collectively.
So much for that, Bernice.
And I have a book coming out, a children's book called It Starts With Me. And it's about the power of love and for children. So they can look for that as well. They'll be able to purchase that as well. It Starts With Me.
And just quickly about the book, when will it be released, and how can people support the book and purchase it?
It will be available right around, I think it's supposed to be available soon, like right in either Thanksgiving, right after Thanksgiving, or in December. So again, if you visit thekingcenter.org and go to the store, click on the store, and it should be listed there and people can order it that way.
I'm looking forward to seeing that book.
And they can also donate. We always can use donations. So the donate button is right at the top to help us continue our work and to help us to create. We're trying to create the beloved community across the globe. We're not the only organization doing that, but I think we're the premier, obviously, because of my father being the namesake and my mother instituting our work as the official living memorial to the life, work, and legacy of my father. So our vision is the beloved community where injustice ceases and love prevails. And we empower people to create a just, humane, equitable, peaceful world by applying Dr. King's nonviolent teachings, which we call Nonviolence 365, because he really taught it as a lifestyle. It's not just confined to when you're fighting for social justice. It fits in the corporate sector, because we have to create beloved community cultures. We got to know how to engage each other nonviolently. The issue of dignity, because nonviolence is about dignity. How do you fight with dignity? How do you ensure people are left with their dignity in your fight for what's right and what's just and what's equitable? So yes, nonviolence is very holistic.
Thank you so much. And you've really built upon your father's legacy, because I was reading that Ebony magazine and Vogue magazine see you as a powerful leader of the Black community. So there are many young people that will want to follow in your footsteps and the footsteps of other activists. So one question I want to ask you is, what advice would you give to a young person that wants to change the world by fighting for the causes that they are passionate about?
I would do a lot of studying. Dr. King prepared. People think that, he just saw a wrongdoing and he just, dived in. No, Dr. King prepared himself. He was a prepared leader. That's why he was effective. So he did a lot of studying, a lot of reading. It's important that whatever you are passionate about, whatever you're concerned about, study it. Study it from every angle. Don't just study what you believe ought to be done. Study why people don't believe it should be done, because you got to be able to win people over to the cause. And if you don't know why people are thinking in erroneous ways, why they're acting in very unjust and sometimes evil ways, you're not going to be able to reach them. And again, everybody won't be reached. But for the most part, I believe we can reach most people. But you got to study. So I would say to them, study as much as you can in whatever area you're passionate about, and then attach yourself to people who are doing the work in that area. One of the things we don't need too much more of is somebody creating a new effort. We got so many causes, organizations, initiatives in our world. The problem is we haven't given them the strength that they need. We haven't emboldened them with enough people and resources financially to be effective. Because what happens is, people break off or they decide, well, let me do this. And that's already been done by 400 people, 400 organizations. And so it's like, find an organization that you can match yourself with and dive in to offer your gifts, because that's important. Know what your gift is in the struggle. Everybody doesn't have to show up on a street in a protest. The movement is not about demonstration and protest. It's a holistic engagement. Sometimes there's work that has to take place in the suites, in the rooms, at the table, and information gathering and educating the masses is as much a part of that. There's nothing wrong with people. Can you imagine an army that has the wrong information and they go into a territory? They can destroy lives innocently because they haven't gathered enough information. They didn't make sure everybody was educated to know, what the deal is and how we're going to move into a territory or whatever. And it just becomes destructive of human life, destructive of properties, and it's irreversible damage. You don't want that. So please, 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 if you're a young person passionate, really study, educate yourself holistically, get attached to people who are doing the work, and discover what your gifts and talents are, and allow yourself to move or connect to the movement in that way. And don't feel guilty if you don't go and hold up a protest sign. Montgomery bus protest, and I'll close with this. The Montgomery bus protest is not what ended segregation on those buses. It was the Supreme Court case. So while the people were marching and demonstrating, that was doing something to their dignity. That was doing something to their psyche. That was giving them the strength of resolve to know that we can stand up as a collective with a strategy to see things changed. But at the same time, there was a court case taking place while they were doing their stuff in the streets. So there all kind of roles. There were people who were working to coordinate the carpools. They're different roles and functions in a movement.
Thank you so much, Bernice, for such an exceptional interview. It was an absolute honor to interview you, and I thank you for all the work that you've done across the world.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
In the first kingdom, the bodies were frail, no mobility of limbs, no laughter being exuded. But in the second kingdom, there was joy, there was excitement, there was mobility of limbs and forward moving progress. And the couple stood back and said, whoa, wait a minute, what is the difference in these two kingdoms? And the angel said to them, there's one law in both kingdoms. And he went on to say, you must use the utensils provided by the management. That was the law. But these were 10 feet long utensils. And he said, you see, over in that first kingdom where the bodies were frail and there was little mobility and there was no laughter, he said they were taking these 10 feet utensils and they were literally trying to feed themselves and they were starving to death. But in the second kingdom, where there was mobility of limb, forward moving progress, laughter being exuded, he said they took the same 10 feet utensils, but they decided to reach across the table and feed each other. We're in a time now where we've got to begin to reach across the table and feed each other, because in our doing that, we're able to educate, we're able to elevate. We cannot afford to leave anybody in their ignorance. It's actually irresponsible to leave anybody in their hate, in their ignorance, in their fear, in their prejudice, in their anger, in their bitterness. We are all a part of one human family, and the only way we're going to make it going forward is if we do it understanding that only together will we win. And then we can all join Dr. King and say those words, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are all free at last. God bless you.